Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Treasure Tales channel. We often talk about the financial side of treasure hunting, but sometimes the thing you find in an abandoned storage unit are worth so much more than cash. Meet Walter and his 19-year-old grandson Jaden. They live in Nashville, Tennessee. Walter is a 71, a retired Ford assembly line worker with his hands like shovels. He is a man of few words and hard work. Jaden is a college freshman who practically lives with his headphones around his neck and a phone glued to his hands. He genuinely believed his grandfather lived in another century. They only saw each other on Thanksgivings and Christmas, and they barely spoke. So when Walter called Jaden on a Thursday night and simply grunted, "We're going for a drive Saturday, dress comfortably," Jaden only agreed because his mom begged him not to say no. Jaden thought he was just being dragged along to do heavy lifting in a dusty, worthless garage. He had absolutely no idea that his grandfather's $55 blind gamble wouldn't just uncover a massive fortune in vintage sports history, it would reveal a literal ghost from the past and completely secure his college future. At 9 a.m. on Saturday, they were standing at a bleak storage facility on the east side of Nashville. Jaden was leaning against a chain-link fence, aggressively scrolling through his phone. Walter was silently studying every open locker. When the manager opened unit number 3, the crowd of experienced buyers took one look and immediately walked away. It was small, incredibly dark, and the first row looked like absolute garbage. Flimsy cardboard boxes, a couple of splintered wooden crates, and a massive, bulky shape hidden under a filthy canvas tarp in the back. "Grandpa, this is literally just trash," Jaden sighed, not even looking up from his screen. Walter didn't answer. He just waited for the auctioneer to call out a starting bid of $55 and he slowly raised his calloused hand. Nobody else bid. They returned the next morning to clean it out. Jaden was already annoyed. He grabbed the handles of the first cardboard box to haul it out, but he didn't realize the bottom of the box was completely rotted from old water damage. The cardboard ripped and the contents violently spilled out onto the dirty concrete. "Great, it's ruined," Jaden groaned, reaching for his phone again. But Walter knelt down. He didn't see trash. He picked up a stack of old Sport Illustrated magazines from 1970s and 80s. The edges were slightly yellowed, but they were perfectly intact inside clear sleeves. "Jaden, put the phone down," Walter commanded. There was a weight in his voice that made Jaden instantly freeze and pocket his device. Walter picked up a specific magazine, opened it to a centerfold, and pointed to a player with a thick mustache. "See this guy? I saw him play live in 1974. Your grandmother was holding my hand when he stepped onto the field." Jaden looked at the photo and then at his grandfather, suddenly seeing him a completely different light. They started carefully digging through the rest of the spilled items. Inside, thick, waterproof binders were pristine NFL and MLB programs for the 1960s, alongside hundreds of baseball cards sorted by year and team. Walter carefully slid a specific vintage baseball card out of a binder. Jaden asked who it was. Walter calmly stated the name. Jaden secretly pulled his phone back out, googled the card, and his eyes went wide. "Grandpa, this card alone is worth—" "I know exactly what's worth," Walter interrupted, his voice steady. "I knew what it was worth before your father was even born." The vibe in the unit completely shifted. Jaden was fully engaged now. They moved to the back of the locker to tackle the massive object hidden under the heavy canvas tarp. They grabbed the dusty fabric and pulled it back together. Sitting in the shadows was a full-sized vintage 1979 arcade cabinet. The side art was slightly scuffed, but the glass screen was perfectly intact. Jaden didn't recognize the 8-bit game, but Walter recognized it immediately. "There are maybe 10 of these left in the entire country in the original condition," Walter said, knocking his heavy knuckles against the thick wood cabinet. But as Walter reached around the back to grab the power cord, a notorious local flipper walking down the hallway stopped and laughed. "Don't even bother, old man," the flip sneered. "I rented the unit next door last year. The roof is in the section leaks directly onto the back walls. The machine has been sitting in the puddle for a decade. The motherboard is completely fried." Jaden's heart sank. A working machine was worth thousands. A fired box of rotting wood was worthless. But Walter had spent 40 years building cars on a Ford assembly line. He didn't care what a flipper had to say. He grabbed a multi-tool from his pocket, snipped the fried end of the power cord, quickly spliced a fresh block onto the copper wires, and plugged it into the hallway outlet. Click. The CRT screen flashed to life, glowing with the neon 1979 pixels. The classic nostalgic arcade music echoed down the concrete hallway. The flipper's jaw dropped, and he walked away in the silence. Jaden just stared at his grandfather in absolute awe. Right next to the arcade machine sat two heavy wooden crates. They were nailed completely shut. Walter used his pry bar to crack the first one open. Inside were dozens of autographed baseballs resting in acrylic display cubes. Walter picked them up one by one, naming the legendary players without even looking at the authenticity certificates, but the second crate was different. Underneath a thick layer of crumpled 1987 newspapers, there was a signed baseball helmet. And tucked inside the helmet was a small black and white photograph in a tarnished silver frame. It was a picture of a crowded baseball stadium in the 1970s. The focus wasn't on the field, it was on the bleachers. Sitting right in the middle of the cheering crowd was a ruggedly handsome young man in his mid-20s, smiling wider than anyone else. Jaden stared at the photograph for a long time, then he looked at Walter's weathered face, then back to the photo. "Grandpa, is that you?" Walter took the frame from Jaden's hands. He stared at the young version of himself for a very long moment, then very gently he slipped the photograph into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. "Your grandmother took this picture," Walter whispered. He didn't say another word. And Jaden knew better than to ask. The massive arcade cabinet was purchased by a private collector from Memphis for a solid $3,800. The vintage cards, the autographed baseballs, and the programs were slowly sold through a specialized sports memorabilia shop in Nashville over the next months. The total payout was massive. It was more than enough. A few weeks later, Walter sat across from Jaden at the kitchen table. He slid a thick sealed envelope across the wood. It contained the exact amount needed for entirely pay off Jaden's upcoming college tuition. Walter looked his grandson in the eye and said only one sentence: "Your grandmother would want you to finish." Jaden couldn't hold back his tears. The next storage auction was scheduled for the first Saturday of the following month. But this time, Walter didn't have to call. Jaden called his grandfather on the Thursday night to ask what time they were leaving, and for the entire Saturday, they spent digging through units together. Jaden's phone stayed locked in the glove compartment of the truck. Sometimes, the greatest thing you can rescue from an abandoned room isn't a vintage collectible, it's a connection you thought was lost forever. That's the end of the story. I think it's very unexpected and very heartwarming to find a picture of younger you in a random storage unit like that. So please share your thoughts, your impression of this story, and if you have your own, please share in the comments with us. And please, if you like the video, give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and see you next time.